Hey guys, our last case study is going to be on Franklin Roosevelt. He's the 32nd President of the United States. He served from 1933 to 1945. He's a member of the Democratic Party, and one of the most famous quotes from him that you probably didn't even know was Franklin Roosevelt is, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." This is a map showing the United States at the time of the election. Franklin Roosevelt ran against Herbert Hoover, who was the Republican, and as you can see, it was pretty much a landslide victory for Roosevelt. Almost the entire country voted for him. A little bit of background. Roosevelt was president during one of the most difficult times in U.S. history. The Great Depression and World War II were going on, and were really affecting the economy and the public, so he came up with a lot of different plans for the country. His most famous plan was the New Deal program, and it was designed to bring the nation back to prosperity. A little known fact about FDR is he signed a grand total of 3,522 executive orders. So that's more than any other president has ever signed in history. His most famous accomplishment as president is the New Deal. Roosevelt proposed a New Deal for America, and some of the things that were dealt with in this New Deal program was the Emergency Banking Relief Act, Homeowners Loan Corporation, and Civilian Conservation Corporation. So the Emergency Banking Relief Act allowed the Treasury to reopen the banks to allow Americans to get loans. The Homeowners Loan Corporation allowed Americans to refinance loans that they could not pay off, and the Civilian Conservation Corporation put young, unmarried men to work planting trees and creating parks. Under the New Deal, Roosevelt also established the Tennessee Valley Authority to assist poor rural areas, and with that, he established the Rural Electrification Administration, which brought electricity to locations that had never had it before. So if you think back, this was less than 100 years ago, and some places in the United States never had electricity, which is kind of crazy to think about. So keep that in mind when we talk about the presidents, that the country was so different, even though it wasn't that long ago. The New Deal is clearly a very big topic, because there's a lot to say about it. But because of President Roosevelt, we also have things like Social Security, minimum wage, we have a 40-hour work week, overtime pay. I don't know if you can see it here or if you guys have seen them at home, your parents have showed you. You have Social Security cards now. That's because of President Roosevelt, and all of these policies were made to benefit American people during this time of economic depression where people were starving, they were homeless, there were tons of huge economic problems that were going on. In 1936, so his 4-year term ended in 1936, he was re-elected to the presidency, and you can see that it was an even bigger acceptance of him, and he got even more votes than the first time because Pennsylvania now voted for him, and a couple states up here in the Northeast voted for him that didn't before. When we talked about Jefferson, we talked about a laissez-faire approach to the presidency. The government wasn't going to be very hands-on. Roosevelt was hands-on. He was not a laissez-faire president at all. In 1937, he had just won his re-election, and he saw this as approval from American people over his policies, and he also decided that this gave him the power and the acceptance to expand the powers of the presidency, because he assumed that the American people wanted him to basically make all the decisions for them and guide them, and they were totally okay with what he was doing. That was not necessarily the case. So one of the things that Roosevelt tried to do was mess with the Supreme Court system. And the way that the Supreme Court works is that the president appoints all of the judges. And the Senate has to approve them. So we recently saw that in history just earlier this year, late in 2018, where there was a new appointment in the government. The President Trump decided he wanted to have somebody in power, and the Senate had to confirm him, and we watched as a lot of people debated it. There were a lot of investigations into it. It's a big process for everybody. So this is one of our system's checks and balances, the way that the president makes a recommendation and then the Senate approves it. Roosevelt, when he was proposing all of his New Deal agenda, he got a lot of it signed into legislation, but some were not, and they were ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So he was infuriated by this, and he began to view the justices as the primary enemy of his presidency. He began to come up with a scheme to alter the makeup of the court to favor his agenda. So because he can recommend people to the seats, but they all serve for life, he had to come up with some kind of new plan. The Supreme Court structure at the time was as follows. 3 justices always supported the president, 4 justices always went against the president, and 2 justices were swing votes that were unpredictable. So depending on the topic, they could go either way. FDR called them the 9 old men. Now that's not true. We have some women on there. We have Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's been really popular lately. But at this time, it was just men. And in order to ensure that his laws would always be upheld, Roosevelt decided that he was going to come up with this mathematical solution, which was 9 plus 6 equals 15. Since justices do serve for life, FDR was concerned about how long those justices would be on the court. So they can choose to resign whenever they want to, or they can serve until they die. And that's still the case now. But Roosevelt wanted to expand the court and appoint 6 new justices who would support him. They could join with his loyal 3 old judges to form a new majority of 8 out of 15 rather than 5 out of 9. Since he wanted to expand the number of justices, he was going to create a new majority for himself. Congress said no way. At this point, even Roosevelt's most loyal supporters saw his actions as extreme, and the Constitution clearly stated that the court should have 9 justices. So ultimately, he didn't get his way, but he did do a lot of good things in the presidency, like a lot of the New Deal programs that we still have. We still have the Tennessee Valley Authority, we still have Social Security, we still have loan acts and banking acts and all kinds of good stuff that's out there that did result from this. But at the end of his presidency, he didn't really get his way anymore because he was just trying too hard to be outside the realm of his explicit and implied powers. All right, that's all you have to know about Roosevelt. So come to class, prepared, finish up your notes. If you have questions, let me know, and we'll do something fun in class.